Welcome to Create More Intimacy, a podcast for men. I'm Elisa Stoddard, and I help successful men stop chasing sex and start building real connection so they finally feel close, connected, and wanted again. Is your marriage stuck in the fight and silent treatment cycle? Here's how it usually looks. Your wife brings something up. Maybe you forgot to do what she asked or brush something off that mattered to her. You think it's not a big deal, but to her it is. And instead of talking it through, that spark catches. A small frustration turns into a blow-up. Voices get sharper, tempers flare, and suddenly you're both defending yourself or firing back. And here's the kicker. The blow-up usually isn't even about what started it. The real issue gets buried under layers of anger and hurt feelings and old resentments. And then the silence. Not the comfortable kind of silence. This one's heavy, punishing, and just icy. You sit at dinner with barely a word exchanged. The kids feel the tension, but no one explains what's going on. Nights are quiet, with your backs turned in bed, both stewing in your own thoughts. And the cycle repeats. One of you pushes, the other withdraws. Round and round you go. Neither side feels closer. Neither side feels understood. Both of you walk away wounded. Maybe you've told yourself, this is just how we are, or all couples fight. But deep down, you know it's not working. Because fights don't bring you closer, and silent treatments don't resolve anything. They're not communication. They're walls. And every time those walls go up, connection goes down. Emotional, physical, and sexual. Now, some of you listening grew up in homes where fights were loud and constant. You absorbed that chaos and carried it forward. Others grew up in homes where the opposite happened. Parents hid their arguments. On the surface, everything looked fine. But what kids see in those homes is someone quietly taking it until one day they've had enough and they leave. To a child, it feels like it came out of nowhere. Both patterns teach the wrong lesson, because if your children don't see how to disagree respectfully and then repair afterwards, they do not learn how to do it themselves. They grow up thinking either you fight until someone wins or you avoid conflict altogether. And that's a completely missed opportunities. Families could show that disagreements are normal, that repair is possible, and that connection can actually grow stronger after conflict. But if you didn't see it modeled, you can't expect yourself to know how to do it. And that's what I want to unpack today. Why fights and silent treatments fail, what they're actually costing you, and what you can do instead to break free of the cycle. Welcome to episode 23, Why Fighting and Silent Treatments Don't Bring You Closer. When I think back to my family growing up, I remember both sides of communication. There were times when my parents seemed to talk things through, and other times when it felt like there was no communication at all. Fighting wasn't the norm, at least not that I was aware of as a kid. What I noticed more, especially as I got older, was the tension. My mom was often visibly irritated, sometimes ignoring, sometimes critical. And looking back, I suspect she tried and eventually got tired. Those patterns didn't stay in the past. They followed me into adulthood. In my marriage, I don't actually remember the details of most of the arguments my husband and I have had. I couldn't tell you what triggered them or what words were said even. What I remember most clearly is the silent treatments, days and sometimes even like a full week, where there was no conversation. Dinners were awkward. The air in our home was heavy, and I didn't know how to deal with it. So I did what I knew. I kept the family moving. I made meals. I kept routines going, and I carried on with life. On the outside, everything looked fine, but on the inside, I felt powerless and disconnected, and nothing ever truly got resolved. Here is what I have come to understand. Silent treatments are not communication. They're punishment. They send a message, you're not worthy of talking to. You don't matter enough to work this out with. That's why they cut so deep. It's not just the absence of words, it's that hidden message underneath. In fights, as destructive as they are, they carry their own hidden messages too. They often shout, if I can just win this, maybe I'll prove I matter. Maybe I'll finally be heard. Maybe I'll feel worthy. That's why winning becomes so important in conflict. It's not really about the issue at hand. It's about the message underneath, about your worth. And when neither person feels seen or valued, both will fight harder or retreat deeper into silence, just hoping to protect themselves. But here's the truth. Neither approach works. Winning does not create closeness, and silence does not create safety. Both leave you feeling further apart. I've also learned something else along the way. Sometimes what's needed isn't another defense or another round of pointing out your partner's flaws. Sometimes what's needed is openness, humility, the courage to admit your mistakes, even the ability to laugh at yourself. And I'll add this from my own experience. For years, I believed I had to be perfect. That belief did not come from the arguments themselves. It came from the social and religious norms I was raised with. And I thought being flawless, doing everything right, would somehow guarantee peace and approval. But all that striving for unrealistic outcomes only harmed both of us. And it kept me rigid, defensive, and always on edge. And it left no room for grace or humor. What finally helped was dropping how seriously I took myself. When I stopped needing to be flawless, when I could laugh at myself and admit my mistakes, the whole atmosphere shifted. The fights didn't feel so threatening. The silence didn't feel so heavy. And there was finally space for connection to grow. Let's talk about why fights and silent treatments never work. On the surface, they look like opposite strategies. Fighting is loud and emotional and in your face. Silent treatments are cold and quiet and withdrawn. But underneath, they're really two sides of the same coin. Both are ways of protecting yourself. Both come from fear and insecurity. And both send the same message. I don't feel safe with you right now. Think about what happens in a fight. One person feels hurt or overlooked. They bring it up, but instead of listening, the other person gets defensive. Suddenly, it's no longer about solving the issue. It's about proving who's right. Voices rise. Words cut. The energy shifts from, we have a problem to solve, to, I have to win this. And the irony is, the original problem often gets completely lost. The fight takes on a life of its own. You're not arguing about the dishes or the text message or the schedule anymore. You're arguing about respect, about appreciation, about who holds power in the relationship. And those are battles no one ever wins. Now, look at the silent treatment. On the outside, it seems calmer, but it's just as destructive. Silence is withdrawal. It says, I'm not going to fight you, but I'm not going to connect with you either. It leaves the other person stewing and feeling punished and rejected and shut out. And the silence doesn't make the issue go away. It makes it bigger. The longer it drags on, the more resentment grows. You start building stories in your head, like she must not care, or he doesn't love me, or I must not matter. And by the time you finally speak again, the distance between you is wider than it was before. The truth is, both fighting and silence comes from the same root, disconnection. When you fight, You're desperate to be heard, to prove you matter, to claw your way back to some sense of worth. When you go silent, you're trying to protect yourself, to avoid more hurt, to hold on to a sense of control. But neither one builds intimacy. Neither one solves the issue. Both build walls. And if you look at it closely, most of us are repeating what we saw growing up. Some of my clients tell me they grew up in homes where fight meant someone was going to leave. Maybe a parent walked out of the room, maybe they left for hours, and sometimes they left permanently. So now, as adults, they carry the same fear. Any fight could lead to divorce. And it's no wonder so many men either avoid conflict at all costs or fight to the death trying to win. Neither one feels safe. And let's be honest, fights and silence don't just affect the two of you. They affect your whole family. Kids feel the tension. They notice the icy dinners, the slammed doors, the parents sleeping on the couch. When couples run out of ways to connect, separate bedrooms become the default. And while that might bring temporary relief, what it really signals is disconnection, a kind of giving up, when the skills to work through it are just not there. Kids pick up on all of it. They may not know what started it, but they know something's wrong. And here's the heartbreaking part. They start forming their own beliefs about what marriage looks like. Some kids decide, oh man, I'll never get married, it's too painful. Others think, oh, this must be normal, so I'll just put up with it when it's my turn. Either way, they carry those messages forward. And unless something changes, the cycle repeats in the next generation. That's why fights and silent treatments fail so completely. They don't just fail to solve the problem in the moment. They fail to build trust, safety, and intimacy over time. They don't show your spouse that you value them. They don't show your kids how to work through conflict. They don't create closeness. They create distance. And I'll tell you this, no amount of winning the argument will ever make you feel worthy. And no amount of silence will ever make you feel safe. I want to share a story from one of my clients because his experience is one I hear often, and it may sound familiar to you. He told me that for years he always played the victim in his marriage. Every conversation felt like an attack. His wife brought up a concern. He twisted it into proof that she didn't respect him or that she was blaming him for everything that went wrong. He couldn't hear her without feeling defensive. Over time, she got tired of trying. At first, she would push harder to get through to him. But when nothing changed, she eventually stopped. She gave up on bringing things up. And I will tell you this, men, hear me. When a woman goes silent, your marriage is on life support. Because silence doesn't mean she's okay with things. It means she's done fighting for connection. For him, it felt like the rug had been pulled out from under his feet. He thought he was protecting himself by pushing back, but instead, he was pushing her away. What he eventually realized was that these patterns were not really about his wife at all. They came from much earlier in his life. He grew up in that era that many of us did, that kids are seen and not heard. And that meant he didn't have a voice. If he did speak up, he was ignored or shut down or criticized. As a boy, he learned to keep quiet because nothing good came from sharing what he thought or felt. And that left him feeling powerless and voiceless. So when conflict came up in his marriage, those old feelings came rushing back. He didn't just hear his wife's words. He heard echoes from his childhood telling him again that his voice didn't matter. His defensiveness was really about fear. Fear of being dismissed. fear of being worthless. But here's the hard truth. Because he never saw healthy disagreements modeled, he had no idea how to handle conflict as an adult. So he fought to prove he mattered. And his marriage paid the price. The good news is, once he could name the pattern, everything started to shift. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you here. His wife was not suddenly open to trusting the changes. After years of hurt, she was skeptical. She honestly thought it might be too late. And that's important to say, because sometimes your growth doesn't immediately restore the relationship. But here's what did change. Him. For the first time, he stopped twisting everything into an attack. He stopped fighting to be the victim and started taking responsibility for how he showed up. He began listening, not to defend, but to understand. And even if his wife couldn't fully accept it yet, he knew the work he was doing mattered. Because here's the truth. When you work on yourself, when you stop letting old patterns run your life, you reclaim your sense of worth. You stop needing every conversation to prove that you matter. You start standing on your own 2 feet instead of depending on someone else's approval. For him, that shift was huge. It didn't erase the past for sure, and it didn't magically fix the marriage overnight. But it gave him something even more powerful: the ability to show up differently, to choose maturity instead of defensiveness, to choose listening instead of twisting, to choose growth even when it's hard. And that's the kind of change that lasts. So if fights and silent treatments don't work, what does? I want to be clear. I'm not saying you'll never disagree with your wife again. Disagreements are normal. In fact, they're necessary. 2 people living a full life together are bound to see things differently. The goal isn't to avoid conflict. The goal is to handle it in a way that creates connection instead of distance. Here are a few shifts I teach my clients. Things that sound simple but are deeply powerful when you actually practice them. 1. Stop taking offense at everything. One of the biggest traps I see men fall into is making every comment about their worth. Your wife says something about the dishes and you hear, "You're not a good husband." She points something out with the kids and you translate it to mean, "You're failing as a dad." When you hear her words through the filter of worth, everything stings. And when everything stings, you either fight back or shut down. What if, instead, you practiced not taking offense right away? What if you let her words be about the moment, not about your value as a man? When you stop making everything a personal attack, you open up space for real conversations. 2, admit your mistakes quickly. This is one of the most mature things you can do in a marriage. When you realize you dropped the ball, say it. "You're right, I forgot. I'll take care of that now." No defensiveness, no excuses, just owning it. I can't tell you how much trust this builds. Because what your wife really wants isn't perfection, it's honesty. She wants you to know she can count on you to be real, even when you mess up. 3, disagree without disconnecting. This one's huge. Most couples believe that if they disagree, they're not on the same team. But disagreement doesn't have to mean disconnection. It sounds like this: "I see it differently, but I still care about what matters to you." Or, "We're not on the same page right now, but I'm not going anywhere." Those kinds of statements change the whole atmosphere. They let your wife know she's safe, even in the conflict. And that safety is what keeps intimacy alive. 4, use humor and humility. One of the most powerful ways to break tension is to laugh at yourself, not at her, at yourself. When you stop taking yourself so dang seriously, arguments will lose their bite. You can say, wow, I'm really worked up about this one, aren't I? Or, okay, I sound like a broken record right now. That kind of humility takes the air out of the fight. It shows your wife you're willing to look at yourself honestly, and it invites her to lower her guard too. 5, focus on repair, not winning. Remember what we talked about earlier, how fights and silence both send hidden messages about worth? The truth is, repair sends the opposite message. It says, you matter enough for me to come back. You matter enough for me to make this right. Repair does not mean sweeping it under the rug. It means circling back. It sounds like, I shouldn't have raised my voice, I'm sorry. Or, that silence wasn't fair, and I want to do better. When you focus on repair, you stop keeping score and start building trust. Now, I know some of you are thinking, oh, that sounds so good, but what if my wife doesn't change? What if she still fights or goes silent? Here's the thing. You cannot control her side of it, but you absolutely can control yours. And when you show up differently, calmer, more open, more mature, it changes the dynamic. Even if she doesn't respond right away, you've shifted the atmosphere. You've made space for something different to grow. And honestly, the biggest win isn't even what happens in the marriage. It's what happens to you. When you stop fighting to prove your worth and start standing in it, you become the kind of man who can handle conflict without falling apart. You become someone your wife can trust, someone your kids can look to, someone you can actually respect when you look in the mirror. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about avoiding fights or ending silent treatments. It's about becoming the man who knows how to stay connected in the middle of hard things. Here's what I want you to take from this. Fights and silent treatments are not communication, they're walls. And every time those walls go up, connection goes down. Underneath both fighting and silence is the same struggle. Worth. Fighting says, if I win, maybe I'll matter. Silence says, if I withdraw, maybe I'll stay safe. Neither one really works. What does work is maturity. It looks like not taking everything as a personal attack. It looks like admitting mistakes instead of defending them. It looks like learning to disagree without disconnecting. It looks like humor, humility, and repair. The point is not to avoid conflict. The point is to use it to build connection instead of distance. When you do that, your marriage changes. And maybe more importantly, so do you. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. If something in this episode hit home, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps more men find the support they need. And if you are ready to get help or take the next step, you'll find the link to book a free call in the show notes. I'll see you next time.